When Endgame came out, many hailed it as the most ambitious crossover event in history, which led to many great memes. And although every year Marvel Comics puts out at least one major crossover event, there was of course a first. This is the Kree-Skrull War, and even though it's kind of dumb by today's standards, there is no doubt that it was one of the most significant events in all of comic history, inspiring many large-scale blockbusters like Secret Wars and DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, sure, Marvel had crossovers in the past, but they were small-scale, like Spider-Man trying out for the Fantastic Four. But the Kree-Skrull War was on a whole different level. Obviously, the Kree and the Skrulls were there, but this was the first time the two iconic alien races ever appeared in a comic together, and they were being fought by the current group of Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the entirety of the original Avengers team who had all left to do their own thing, Captain Marvel, and the Inhumans. But like I said earlier, the book is also pretty damn dumb. We got evil cows, we got horny cavemen, we got gun phones, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Hello and welcome to Comic Drake, where I talk about comic books and my name is Drake. Let's talk about it. The Kree-Skrull War was told in the pages of Avengers number 89 through 97 in 1971, and was written by Roy Thomas and illustrated by Sal Buscema, John Buscema, and Neil Adams. The book starts out with this dude, Rick Jones. He's the kid that Bruce Banner pushed out of the way of the Gamma Bomb, which turned him into the Hulk. But Marvel has never really known what to do with him afterwards. Rick Jones was always getting flung around from book to book, desperate to try to make something stick. Well, at this point in time, Rick had a Shazam kind of thing going on, where he could clang his bracelets together and swap places with Captain Mar-Vell, a former Kree soldier that was stuck in an alternate dimension. The body swaps only lasted for a few hours at a time, so Mar-Vell was desperate to get out of this negative zone. One day, the captain saw Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four hanging around the dimension and then go through a portal that closed up behind him. Mar-Vell was like, there's been a door here this entire time. So he swaps places with Rick, breaks into the Fantastic Four's lab, and opens up their portal to drag Rick out of the negative zone. The plan worked flawlessly. Only problem though is that a big evil bug dude followed him out. When Mar-Vell broke into the lab though, the Avengers were alerted to help out. They show up in the nick of time, with Vision doing that classic maneuver of phasing through the Bugman so that he would jump right back into the portal. So, crisis averted, right? Well, yeah, but then suddenly a giant unrelated robot appeared out of nowhere, grabs Mar-Vell, and then vanishes. But before anyone had time to process that, the former Avengers Yellowjacket and Wasp raised a distress signal. See, they were out in Alaska doing science shit with the government, but then a prehistoric ring of Earth popped up and the government scientists got stuck in it. Hank and Janet got on a giant prehistoric dragonfly to go save them, but once they entered the circle, they started to feel woozy. Thinking that there was no other way to save them in time, Hank backhands his wife off the dragonfly so she would fall outside of the radius. This was a full 10 years before Hank slapped her again and left a permanent stain on his reputation. It's the same pose and everything. But anyway, it's revealed that all of this had been the work of the Kree bad guy, Ronan the Accuser. He had used that robot earlier to capture Mar-Vell, who he plans on taking back to their homeworld. And while he's here on Earth, he might as well use a big de-evolution ray to wipe out all life on the planet by devolving them back to amoebas. Because comics. This is why Hank was feeling so sick earlier. He's a caveman now and scoops up his wife to go yabba dabba doo. Ronan captures Vision and Scarlet Witch, who during all of this conflict began to develop feelings for each other, culminating in them trying to kiss while in captivity. Vision pulls back at the last minute going, "No, I can't, I'm a robot and you're a human!" And Ronan just sits there channeling his best Lord Farquaad impression and laughs at them. The conflict randomly ended when Ronan got a phone call from space in the middle of the fight, and a general tells him that the Skrulls are invading, prompting him to drop everything and return home to join the war. The Avengers say that's not their problem, so they shut down the de-evolution machine, returned everything back to normal, and told the scientists they rescued to keep everything that happened a secret so that there wouldn't be a worldwide alien panic. Cut back to the Avengers mansion, and the team is hanging out and serving up looks. Bro, Vision is rocking the hell out of that turtleneck. What is drip if not swag persevering? But remember how the rescued scientists said that they were going to keep quiet? Yeah, they went back on that the very second they got home. Enter Warren Craddock. He's the head of the newly formed Alien Activities Commission, and he has a list of aliens that are secretly hiding in America posing as model citizens, and it's his mission to bring them in, along with anyone who might be aiding them. This is 100% a parallel to Senator Joe McCarthy, who ran the Un-American Activities Committee during the Cold War. Just swap out aliens with communists, but don't tell them about the space communist show. They would probably blow a gasket.
Money doesn't exist in the 24th century. The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
McCarthy wants the Avengers to hand over Mar-Vell, but they refuse. Luckily though, the captain's friend Carol Danvers showed up and was like, hey, I know a farm upstate, let's go hide there. But S.H.I.E.L.D. was sent in to intervene. Nick Fury deliberately let Mar-Vell and Danvers get away, because he thinks the whole secret alien panic reeks of the same sentiment that led to the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II. Instead of going to the farm with Mar-Vell, the Avengers opted to bunker down in their mansion, but they were drawn out of hiding because a dude outside of their window was being harassed for being an alien sympathizer. Turns out though that this was simply a ruse, and these guys were just actors trying to serve up a lawsuit to Earth's mightiest heroes for harboring Mar-Vell. After a bad day in court, the Avengers return home, only to be greeted by veteran members Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, who express their deep disappointment in their colleagues and disband the team entirely. Absolutely heartbroken for having been kicked out of their home, the Avengers travel upstate to that farm that Carol Danvers took Mar-Vell to. But then, they're gunned down by some cows. Because comics. This is actually a deep cut to the first time that the Skrulls had ever appeared in the comics, Fantastic Four #2, all the way back in 1962, where the Fantastic Four encountered a group of Skrulls, kicked their asses, and then hypnotized the aliens into being cows. Apparently, a hyperbeam shot out of space and snapped them out of it. The newly awoken cow Skrulls transform into the Fantastic Four and go to town on the Avengers. While Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are taken prisoner, Vision goes into a self-preservation mode, which autopilots him back to the mansion. Hank Pym is called in because he's basically Vision's grandpa. Don't worry about it, that family tree is complicated as hell, but all you need to know is that Pym put on his old Ant-Man costume, shrinks down, and repairs Vision from the inside. Once he's back in tip-top shape, Vision sits up and is like, hey, thanks for fixing me, but also what the fuck, why did you guys kick us out? Iron Man says, no we didn't. Oh my god, it was the Cow Skrulls. Speaking of, the Cow Skrulls captured Carol Danvers and Mar-Vell off screen, but they managed to break free, and the captain decides to build an Omniwave projector. It's essentially a cell phone that allows for instant communication between galaxies, but only if a Kree uses it. If any other species makes a call, it turns into a big gun. As soon as the phone is complete, Mar-Vell instantly destroys it because Carol had been calling him Mar-Vell this entire time, but there's no way that she would have known that's his true name. That's right, Carol is a Skrull too, but not just any Skrull, she is the Super Skrull, an exiled warrior with all of the powers of the Fantastic Four. He takes out Mar-Vell and delivers him and the Maximoff twins as tribute to the Skrull Emperor, and hopes that he'll be welcomed back from exile. The Emperor though is a huge dick, so he says no. He's also a massive misogynist, and is mad that his daughter is his only child. The princess, on the other hand, is super nice and trying to get her dad to stop the war, which is why she's hot and doesn't have that pan dulce chin that every Skrull, including the women, have. Actually, a concha sounds pretty good right now. Hola, mi amor. ¿Puedes traer un concha? Por favor? Gracias, te amo. While all of this was going down, the other team defeated and captured the Cow Skrulls, and because the Avengers were deemed as traitors to America, they sent soldiers armed with Mandroid armor to take them out. Tony Stark was able to defeat them because he's the one that invented them in the first place, but suddenly, one of the Inhumans shows up and explains that the Kree had been aiding a coup that overthrew the Inhuman monarchy, and we find out that Earth is so important to this war because it is the exact midway point between the Kree and Skrull homeworlds. This is actually based on the real-world tactic in World War II, where islands in the Pacific were huge battlegrounds because of their strategic value of being closer to Japan. The Avengers helped get King Black Bolt reinstated, Rick Jones, who had been here the entire time, got kidnapped by the Kree while they ran away, and the team uses Thor's hammer to teleport to space so they can fight the Skrulls, because apparently that's a power that it has. Back to the prisoners. Mar-Vell agrees to make the gun phone for the Emperor, but upon its completion, he used it to make a hologram projection of himself so it looked like that he was still building it in order to execute a sneak attack, because apparently that's a power that it has. Cut to Rick Jones. We find out that during all the chaos and confusion during the war, Ronan overthrew the Kree government and shoved its previous ruler, this head in a jar, into a closet, which they also throw Rick into. Jarhead activates a special power that apparently every human will develop thousands of years in the future, and Jones is able to create a bunch of mental constructs of Golden Age superheroes who go and kick the Kree's ass. What's wild about this, outside of Rick being able to, create people out of thin air, is that this was foreshadowed a few issues earlier when Jones talked about how much he loved Golden Age characters. However, included in this group are a bunch of heroes from old school comic publishers that have since gone out of business. These dudes are all public domain at this point, but that is still super interesting. But Rick has more powers than that. He is able to freeze the entire Kree army in place and also reveal that McCarthy was secretly a Skrull this entire time, so the anti-alien crowd that he had whipped up into a frenzy beat him to death. Crazy fun fact about this, in the original storyline with the Cow Skrulls, there were 4 aliens, but the artist Jack Kirby made a mistake and only drew 3 cows in the final page. So in bringing them back for the Kree-Skrull War, Thomas decided to use this continuity error to his advantage and have the missing 4th alien be the McCarthy character. With the Rick Ex Machina complete, Jarhead is able to regain control of the Kree Empire, so he calls off the war, and yeah, that's how the story ends. It is an extremely anticlimactic ending. For an event called the Kree-Skrull War, intergalactic warfare isn't really the focus, and the storyline feels disjointed, which makes sense considering that Roy Thomas said, quote,
"Did I have some master plan when I started out? Not really. I simply knew that the Kree and the Skrulls would be at war in the far reaches of space and that their conflict would be threatening to spill onto Earth, turning our planet into the cosmic equivalent of some Pacific island during World War II.
Despite all of this, the book was the largest storyline in comic history at the time, and it changed the game for good. With the industry seeing just how big their books could go, longer storylines began being implemented in comics, and eventually other big events like Secret Wars and Crisis on Infinite Earths followed in its footsteps. The war has also been used as the plot for some multimedia adaptations, most notably the Captain Marvel film. Of course, this storyline has since been subject to plenty of retcons. Like, for instance, we're told that during the 5 minutes that Mar-Vell was doing that hologram trick, he had time to charm the princess and hook up with her, leading to the birth of Hulkling of the Young Avengers. And let's not forget that many of the most important figures of the superhero community came together to form the Illuminati to try and prevent anything like this from ever happening again. And apparently, they've been operating in the background of Marvel Comics for decades. During the aftermath, Tony Stark called the hero seen in the previous story to Wakanda, in addition to the Black Panther since he's, the leader of the damn country. In order to prevent something as massive as the Kree-Skrull War from ever happening again, Stark pitched the idea of pulling the resources and handling attacks in a more organized manner, by uniting every corner of the superhero community into a single organization. Everyone hated the idea. Who would run it? Who would they answer to? Would they just get tied up in bureaucracy and never get anything done? Those are all valid concerns. Though Mr. Fantastic piped up and commented that while a huge delegation wouldn't be practical, there was definitely potential in secret meetings just like this one, where these pillars of the superhero community could come together to exchange information and take matters into their own hands on some of the bigger issues, oftentimes before they could balloon into bigger problems. Although these get-togethers and what goes on inside of them would have to be a secret to everybody. No teammates, no best friends, no family. And to ensure that nobody leaked information, the members would have to consent to Professor X scanning their minds. Black Panther was disgusted. Yes, they were leaders. Hell, almost half of them were literally kings. But putting themselves above others and deciding how to handle global affairs from the shadows, he wanted no part of it. Everyone else, though, was on board, and they officially became the Illuminati. Over the decades, this group worked behind the scenes in the Marvel Universe, secretly pulling the strings. One of their first moves was to teleport to the Skrulls' homeworld to flex their muscles and say, "What up, bitches? We're the Illuminati. Next time you want to mess with Earth, you gotta get through us." This backfired horrendously, as they were captured, tortured, and experimented on. Thankfully, the Skrulls underestimated Tony Stark, thinking that he wasn't much of a threat without his armor. But thanks to some combat training from Captain America, Tony was able to take down his guards and rescue the others, allowing them to hijack a ship and escape, destroying a large portion of the Skrulls' fleet in their wake. Though this only increased the Skrulls' hatred for humanity. But unbeknownst to the Illuminati, the experiments that were done on them yielded some very valuable data. See, the Empire had used this data to create a new breed of Super Skrull that perfectly replicated the abilities of any Earthling that they had the DNA of, and they could even mix and match power sets. But they also went one step further. For many years, the top Skrull scientists cloned Reed Richards over and over and over again to use his brilliant mind to come up with a revolutionary breakthrough that would make their shapeshifting fully undetectable. I'm talking about being able to avoid being seen by technology, psychic scans, and even magical detection. The trade-off, though, is that they must fully have their memories wiped and replaced with those of the person they're swapping places with, unable to change back to their original form until their death. With these newly enhanced agents, the Skrulls began kidnapping important figures on Earth, and in turn, they harvested their biological data in order to create even more agents. It's this vicious cycle of espionage. Around the same time, a deeply religious Skrull princess named Ferengi begged the Emperor to read her holy text, which prophesied the destruction of their homeworld, and that in turn, they were meant to claim Earth as their new home. For the sake of her people, the princess begged the Emperor to make the proper preparations before it was too late. Though instead, the Emperor labeled the princess as a religious zealot and banished her off-world. Though, lo and behold, their homeworld was destroyed just as it was foretold. The remaining Skrulls brought Ferengi out of exile, anointed her as their queen, and by utilizing the recent scientific achievements, she got to work on planning a secret invasion. Choosing to lead by example, the Queen herself underwent the disguise treatment by taking on the form of Spider-Woman in order to infiltrate the Avengers and gather up all the data she needed to find the best time to strike. Even with dozens, if not hundreds of Skrull agents in place, a full-scale invasion of Earth would be tricky because of a couple of factors: mutants and Asgardians. But in a stroke of luck, both were wiped off the board at nearly the same time. See, when the Scarlet Witch had a mental breakdown, she cast a spell that depowered most of the mutants on the planet, taking the global population from about 1 million to around 300. As for the Asgardians, they had recently gone through the cataclysmic cycle of Ragnarok and were now hanging out in Oklahoma, still recovering from being reborn into new bodies. Although the Skrulls had been planning the secret invasion for years, the superhuman community started to catch on when a group of heroes killed Elektra, the leader of an evil clan of ninjas who reverted into a Skrull upon her death. This body ended up in the possession of Tony Stark, who took it to his fellow members of the Illuminati, hoping to get to the bottom of things before the inevitable large-scale attack and panic. Yet, this was interrupted when Black Bolt, who famously has a voice that is so powerful that he can obliterate a battalion with a whisper, spoke. Yeah, he had been replaced by a Super Skrull for a good while, and used his vast power to unleash a massive blast on the Illuminati. Luckily, the team was powerful enough to fight off the Infiltrator and his Super Skrull reinforcements, but if someone as high-ranking as King Black Bolt could be snatched up, then nobody could be trusted. And with the wounds of the superhuman Civil War still being fresh, the community became even further divided. Since the very beginning of the new Avengers, Bendis had wanted to write a story arc inspired by Invasion of the Body Snatchers. However, when Marvel released the Civil War event, he decided to rearrange his plans.
I originally would have released the Skrulls right around Civil War, but since I was there for the planning of Civil War and helped create the initial conflict of it, all I kept thinking about was, boy does this help my Skrull thing. If I reveal that the Skrulls were there the whole time and they let, if not nudged, the heroes into beating the shit out of each other, I've got myself a book.
Originally, Secret Invasion was just going to be an arc in Bendis' Avengers comic, but after talking about these plans non-stop for about 4 years, the higher-ups at Marvel started seeing dollar signs in their eyes, and they demanded that he go bigger. They wanted this to be as big of an event as Civil War. At this point in time, Stark was the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he brought Skrull-Elektra to their lab in order to get to the bottom of how the little green men were able to become fully undetectable. Also brought on board were 2 of the greatest scientists on the planet, Reed Richards and Hank Pym. But when word got out that their Black Bolt imposter had been taken out, the Skrulls started making moves to cripple Earth's defenses before their existence became widely known. SWORD's orbital headquarters was destroyed. A Sue Storm doppelganger sent the Baxter Building and the remaining Fantastic Four into the negative zone. But most notably, a Skrull prisoner ship crash-landed in the Savage Land, the wild part of Antarctica that is Marvel's excuse to just have dinosaurs and stuff. This ship was intercepted by 2 separate Avengers teams, but when it opened up, dozens of heroes came out in their classic outfits. They claimed that they were kidnapped by the Skrulls years ago and that they had been held prisoner, asserting that all of the heroes that we had been following all this time were actually sleeper agents. Was this true? Have some of our favorite heroes actually been Skrulls this whole time? Is this the reason why heroes have been constantly fighting amongst themselves in recent years? I actually really like the scene when Wonder Man was interacting with the classic version of Beast, who makes a great case that he must be the real McCoy, since Beast these days is all stern and serious, unlike the jolly blue goofball that he was back when he was an Avenger. Another powerful moment was that when one of the newly freed prisoners was revealed to have been the thought-to-be deceased Mockingbird, her husband Hawkeye, now going by Ronin, shoved his way to the front and demanded to know the significance of October 12th. Mockingbird reveals that October 12th was supposed to be the birthday of their child before she had a miscarriage, and upon hearing this, Clint grabbed her close for a passionate kiss. She clearly wasn't a Skrull, and at long last, he was reunited with the love of his life. Elsewhere, a doppelganger of Stark's butler Jarvis uploaded an alien virus that served to deactivate every piece of Stark tech on the planet, with the added whammy of physically weakening Tony and kicking off a big old fight scene. During the commotion, Iron Man found shelter to deal with his new sickness and was approached by the Spider-Woman of his team, who revealed that she was the Skrull Queen, and also tried to convince him that he was also a sleeper agent. But Tony was saved by Black Widow, who injected Stark with medicine that would get him back up to speed. Meanwhile, Skrull invasion forces launched their attack on the rest of the planet, which got every super team around doing their part to defend their countries. Because one of Stark's first moves as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. was to set up a super team in every state, most of the US was protected. However, that also bit them in the ass because nearly every single one of said teams had a Skrull infiltrate them prior to the invasion, so there was a Skrull in every state. Notably though, Marvel's version of the Suicide Squad, the Thunderbolts, abandoned their post in Colorado in favor of defending Washington, D.C. Their leader, Norman Osborn, yes, the former Green Goblin Norman Osborn, used this opportunity to get in front of as many cameras as possible in order to brand himself as the ultimate patriot. Norman is out here posing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, yelling stuff like, "For Earth, for freedom," and even stabbing Skrulls with a goddamn American flag. But the icing on the cake is when he takes an interview in the middle of the fight to throw shade at Stark Tech while also hyping up his own company. One of the big things in this event is that every time a Skrull kills someone, they say the phrase, "He loves you." The he in question is their god, Clybin, the Eternal Skrull. So because this invasion is a holy war that's meant to fulfill an ancient prophecy in his name, Hercules gathers up a god squad to traverse the spiritual realms and kill the Skrull pantheon. It's literally just two dudes though, so I don't get why they call it a pantheon in the comics. Like, how many gods does it take to make a pantheon? Let me know in the comments. The Hercules tie-in is a lot of fun, and even though it has a great premise and is one of the most interesting parts of the whole Secret Invasion event, it's not really relevant to the plot itself, so I'm not going to go into detail. Though, definitely pick it up if you're ever going to read this event for yourself, which frankly, you should. Anyway, the Inhumans are making a journey of their own by going out to space to recruit the Skrulls' ancient enemy, the Kree, to essentially reignite the Kree-Skrull War by allying themselves with Earth and wipe out the alien spaceships that are orbiting the planet. The Kree's leader accepts, but only under one condition. Princess Crystal needed to give her hand in marriage. Although Crystal initially refused, Queen Medusa made her do it anyway, but she ended up coming around because she agreed it would be the best move for the safety of the planet. Back on Earth, the Skrulls are trying to get their hands on the Great Vibranium Mound of Wakanda, but as we all know, the country has never fallen, and they got to keep that impressive track record through brilliant tactics and subterfuge. The big event was when a one-on-one fight occurred between T'Challa and a Super Skrull, and much like the Hercules tie-in, this is another one of the highlights of the event that I seriously wish there was more of. I audibly gasped when I read that the T'Challa and Storm that the Skrulls had captured were actually their own soldiers who the Wakandans had made to look like their rulers and embedded voice boxes that played the same pre-recorded clips over and over and over again while they endured torture. It's great stuff, read it. Across the pond, the Skrulls are invading the magical realm of Avalon through a portal in the UK, and it's there that they gathered all sorts of magical relics, including the Holy Grail. And you know what they do with them? They melted these powerful ancient artifacts into a massive gold chain, which they used to bling out their strongest sorcerer. Thankfully though, the invasion force was taken out through the combined might of Captain Britain and a powerful demon. Over in New York, the remaining X-Men did their best to hold off the attackers. And remember how the Beast in the Savage Land was talking about how he must be the real one since he would never be so dark and serious? Well, when trying to science his way into a solution, Beast creates a virus that is both deadly to Skrulls and fast-acting to boot. Ultimately though, he left the hard decision of essentially committing Skrull genocide to Cyclops, who, without hesitation, coats the X-Men's outfit in the virus and gets inside the Skrull ship to infect them by pretending to surrender. But once the alien soldiers start dropping like flies, Cyclops demands that they surrender in exchange for the antidote. Full of pride, the soldiers refuse and instead self-destruct their own ships to save the rest of their race from the ravages of the virus. And you know what the worst part is? Cyclops didn't even ask Beast if they had in fact made an antidote. Holy shit, that's fucked up. Cutting back to the SHIELD lab, Reed Richards is able to uncover the secret of the supposedly undetectable Skrulls, but he was stopped in his tracks by his assistant Hank, who reveals himself as a spy and shot Reed with a gun that destabilizes his form, resulting in him looking like the worst cheese pull on the planet. But after being saved by the head of SWORD, Reed gets to work on building a big gun that he brings to the Savage Land and starts blasting. This device reveals the identity of the Skrulls once and for all, including Mockingbird, which sent Clint into a blind fury as he had to lose his wife all over again by killing her himself. With defeat after defeat, the global invasion force was losing steam, culminating in most of the remaining heroes and troops clashing in one final battle. Punches and energy blasts are coming from every direction, and in the middle of the conflict, Iron Man's armor starts acting up, so he has to leave to go get a new one. But it looks like he's fleeing the battle, and that is not a good look. However, the Skrulls had two secret weapons. First off, Hank Pym's imposter had tainted the Wasp's suit in order to turn her into a giant human bomb. And with no other choice, Thor summoned a mystical tornado that scattered her molecules to the wind, which seemingly killed her. With that plan off the table, the Skrulls went straight to the nuclear option. Remember how I said that Tony Stark had placed a super team in every state? Well, because all the imposters slipped under the radar, the Skrulls managed to build towers at every one of those 50 bases that could link together to suck the nation into the negative zone, effectively eliminating the majority of the world's defenders in an instant. On top of that, this technology was created by Tony Stark as a means to suck Manhattan into the other dimension just in case it was taken over by a bad guy. And by the way, Tony did this in secret without approval from the United States government, and the Skrulls got onto that by infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. Luckily though, a virtually unknown hero named Crusader noticed the Skrull general fleeing from the battle to activate the portal towers, and he single-handedly saved the planet by taking him out. Crusader is such an interesting character that doesn't get enough love. Meet Curtis. Despite being between jobs, he's a pretty carefree guy that just likes vibing with his friends at the same old diner for breakfast every single morning. But one day when they left, he found a simple ring on the ground and took a liking to it. It didn't matter that his roommate rolled his eyes at his free dumb ring, Curtis still thought it was neat. Though unbeknownst to him, this seemingly random piece of jewelry was actually crafted from a shard of a cosmic cube, powerful reality-bending relics that are some of the most dangerous weapons in the Marvel Universe. The ring was secured by Captain America and was lost just as fast during a fight, and when it landed in Curtis's possession, he discovered that it was capable of creating anything he could think of within a 30-foot radius, so long as he kept his concentration. Though when summoning random shit started to get boring, Curtis decided to take inspiration from his roommate's insult and attempted to try his hand at being a superhero by taking up the identity of Freedom Ring. It's so obvious when you say it out loud, but this pun honestly took me by surprise when it was first pointed out. I love it. So, if you're a fan of Invincible, then you know where this is going. Despite having this insanely awesome and powerful power, Curtis had no actual combat experience, and he bit off more than he could chew by trying to take down the Abomination as his first opponent. Now, Freedom Ring started off strong by summoning a few massive blocks of concrete on him, but after shaking them off, Abomination took Curtis out with a single bone-shattering punch. Luckily though, both Spider-Man and the X-Men showed up shortly thereafter, and Curtis was taken to the hospital, but the fight left him paralyzed from the waist down. But that's when Curtis had an idea. The Freedom Ring was able to do all of this amazing stuff, so it would only make sense that it could help him walk again. And with a little bit of concentration, he was able to do just that. But there's one thing I forgot to mention. Throughout the story, Curtis had been dealing with a nosy neighbor who kept peeking out at him through their front door, and this time when he saw him, there was a confrontation. But to Curtis's surprise, the neighbor gladly welcomed him in and revealed that he was a shape-shifting Skrull. This is Zareg, and he went to Earth to spy on the Avengers. The only problem, though, is that right before he arrived, the team had disassembled due to the Scarlet Witch's mental breakdown. Not really knowing what to do, Zareg started living a normal life on Earth, but because he's, you know, a spy, he had just been listening in on everyone in the apartment building like his own little private reality TV network. However, Zareg was starting to get bored of snooping on everyone's personal life, and he thought it might be fun for him and Curtis to team up as superheroes because as a soldier, he had a lot of combat experience that he could pass along. Curtis accepted, and the two of them pushed the limits of what the Freedom Ring was capable of. The duo trained for 2 weeks straight, discovering that the ring could grant Curtis flight, super strength, and most importantly, enhance durability. Feeling confident in their abilities and teamwork, Curtis and Zareg, now taking up the name of Crusader, decided to get right into the field and take a proper swing at superheroics. And this time, it was another doozy. See, an evil Iron Man from another universe had been going around mopping the floor with the Avengers, but Crusader and Freedom Ring decided to try and take him on anyway. And it did not go well. But despite getting the shit kicked out of him, Curtis got back up and went in for a second round. The evil Tony used his armor shape-shifting abilities to pierce Freedom Ring like a human pincushion. But this heroic gesture freed up an opportunity for Captain America to take out evil Iron Man with a simple bonk on the head with his shield. Though unfortunately, Curtis didn't make it. The story ends with Zareg back in his apartment, and it's revealed that he had taken the Freedom Ring off of his friend's very dead corpse and was now using it for himself to make imaginary Skrull babes feed him fruit. Now, as much as I did enjoy this story, the ending made Crusader a huge douchebag, and not in the fun, lovable jackass way like my favorite superhero, Booster Gold. But here's one of the reasons that I love long-running superhero comics. Because other writers had the opportunity to use previously established characters and concepts, they're able to take stuff that didn't really work well in the past and retool them to tell new great stories. And in my opinion, Crusader got one of the best redemption arcs. Following the Superhuman Civil War, a project called the 50-State Initiative was set up, so that every state in America could have its very own super team. And on top of that, an academy was set up to train prospective heroes to make sure they had everything they needed to handle themselves out in the field. Avengers the Initiative was a pretty fun series that gave an opportunity for both lesser known and brand new characters to get a chance in the spotlight, which of course brings us back to Crusader. First off, his backstory was a lot more fleshed out, so now when Zareg arrived on Earth and discovered that the Avengers had disassembled, he found the next best way to gather intel on Earth's mightiest heroes: renting DVDs of their exploits from a local video store, which really dates the comic. The store's clerk was a massive superhero fangirl and introduced Zareg to all of the best broadcasts and red vines, and in no time at all, Zareg fell in love with her, that god-awful excuse for a candy, and the world of Marvel superheroes. Instead of spying on the apartment building, it's retconned that Zareg had discovered Curtis's powers by seeing him flying away from his place. But the most important change is that he didn't take the Freedom Ring for selfish gain. Rather, that in the Skrull military, when a brother in arms is killed, you honor them by taking up their weapon. In my opinion, this is a great change and adds a lot of depth to both the character and Skrull culture. But after the Superhuman Registration Act was passed, Zareg leapt at the opportunity to become a card-carrying member of the initiative. And even though many of his fellow cadets weren't team players and were oftentimes hot-headed, this new interpretation of Crusader was a serious and noble warrior, which put him in a difficult position considering that his identity as a Skrull was a secret to everyone. The Freedom Ring allowed for Zareg to bypass all the scans, as it made him a human on a molecular level, but he still had his tells. For example, Crusader would sometimes get homesick, but when he discovered that strawberries and pickles tasted like a fruit called tamanja berries, it would be his reminder of home.
It's not terrible. No, it's pretty bad.
One day in the cafeteria, though, Zareg saw Hank Pym eating the exact same dish, leading him to suspect that his superior was a Skrull as well, and this troubled him. To have a Skrull impersonate such a prominent superhero, something big must be brewing, which of course led to a dilemma. How could he pass along this knowledge to the rest of the initiative without revealing his own Skrull identity? This was the beginning of the Skrull's secret invasion of Earth, where they had been secretly replacing high-profile people for years in order to make the planet ripe for conquest. And when the plot came to light, nobody could be trusted. Another superhero named 3D Man discovered that his goggles allowed him to see through Skrull shapeshifting, and he began a crusade to purge the initiative of infiltrators. Zureg got wind of this, and when 3D Man arrived at their base to dispose of the little green men, he panicked about being discovered, and used the Freedom Ring to invert the goggles' polarity, making 3D Man see everybody but him as a Skrull, though of course that only worked while Crusader was nearby. Feeling outnumbered, 3D Man ran off to gather reinforcements. Stick a pin in that because he will be important later. Crusader fought on the front lines of the invasion, but the fear and paranoia being discovered grew worse and worse. Should he change back to his original form, pretend to be a sleeper agent and return to his people, or does he stand by his teammates knowing that if he's killed, he'll revert back and his bloodline will be shamed due to his betrayal? This was further complicated when Crusader went up against a super Skrull named Kartem, his best friend, who was also the one that gave him his iconic scar during a sparring match back in basic training, which he now wears as a badge of armor regardless of what form he takes. Terrified that Kartem would expose his identity, Crusader fought back, dealing a fatal wound in the process. Immediately overcome with grief, Zureg tried to heal his friend with the Freedom Ring, but Kartem refused. Zureg was desperate, and he knew that he could not live with the guilt of killing his best friend, and he desperately tried to encourage Kartem to live for their god. But with his dying breath, Kartem replied that he can see his friend no longer believed in the Skrull way, and he died in his arms. In shame, Crusader accepted that he was a traitor to his race, vowed to be a protector of Earth, and to never change into a different form ever again. But most importantly, he walked away from the battle unscarred. The story gets a little bit of tonal whiplash though, because when Nick Fury told him that he had heard great things about him from Captain America, Zureg acted like an excited child, saying that there was nothing the Empire could do that would shake his love for the planet and the heroes that protect it. I mean, it's a cute moment for Crusader to be a little fanboy and geek out. Like, it's the same as when Ms. Marvel does it, but like, he had just killed his best friend 1 issue ago. I don't know, maybe show at least a little bit of nuance and emotion. Though, the tone did shift back just as quick, because we get another scene of Zureg dealing with more guilt. He knew Pym was a Skrull before the invasion started. If he wasn't so afraid of concealing his identity, perhaps the planet could have been more prepared. Now, Nick Fury noticed his turmoil and came over for a heart-to-heart, so Crusader mentions that he had suspected Pym and felt partly responsible for all the damage that was dealt in the invasion, but Fury assures him that mistakes need to belong in the past, and that he needs to believe that he is doing the right thing, and that the planet was going to be okay because of his help. This pep talk gave Crusader a second wind, and he rose to the occasion as a leader to his fellow initiates, heroically charging headfirst into the fray. There was just one small hiccup. The Skrulls had a backup plan in case the invasion failed. While they had been infiltrating the initiative, the Skrulls set up towers all across the United States that could link together and suck the nation into the negative zone, effectively wiping most of the world's superheroes off the map in an instant. But the Pym imposter was the only one with the activation codes. In the final fight, Crusader noticed that Skrull Pym was running off, and by using the Freedom Ring to grant him the power of super speed, he was able to catch up and defeat him. In a final gambit, Skrull Pym unleashed a poison that was safe to Skrulls, but lethal to humans. But that's the thing, Crusader isn't human, and with this upper hand, he finishes off Skrull Pym once and for all. With the day saved, the entire superhuman community celebrated Crusader's heroic act and Earth's continued safety. But remember how I said to stick a pin in the whole 3D Man situation? Yeah, during all this, he was off somewhere else, where he had joined a group called the Skrull Kill Crew, and he became a hardened and unapologetic hitman against the Skrull Scourge. And in the process, he discovered that the goggles aren't what had the power to see through their disguises. They merely channeled it. So of course, when he makes his return, just as Crusader saved the day, 3D Man sees him in his true form. And without hesitation, he kills him off unceremoniously. In his final moments, Zureg wishes that everything could have ended differently, which activates the Freedom Ring, teleporting him away, never to be seen again. It's been nearly 2 decades since this story, and it's uncertain if Crusader is still alive. In my opinion, he is a fantastic character that I wouldn't mind seeing return. But at the same time, I think the tragedy for all of this makes for great storytelling, and his return, if handled badly, might taint the legacy of the story. But then again, Avengers the Initiative isn't really a book that's talked about much these days, so I guess there isn't much of a legacy per se. Back at the final stand, Wolverine and Queen Varanki are having an intense 1v1 fight, but she's ultimately taken out by Norman Osborn's neutral special, Gun. Without their leader, the invading forces back off, and Earth was finally safe. And in the aftermath, the heroes managed to find the actual prison ship with all the kidnapped folks. So now they're back for good. And this includes the real Mockingbird. And also Elvis. Slowly but surely, Earth started to recover from the invasion, but the United States government was pissed at Iron Man. Because his team wasn't able to detect the spies, the Skrulls got access to all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s intel and technology, which again included tech that could have potentially wiped the entire country off the planet. And to make things worse, when the world needed him most, it looked like he vanished. Because of all of these failures, S.H.I.E.L.D. was disbanded, and the keys to American national security were handed over to Norman Osborn, who is publicly known as being a former supervillain. Yeah, being the one that got the kill shot and all that patriotic showboating won over the American people. A lady at his inauguration even held up the sign that said that Norman wouldn't hurt a fly, and when he's called out in a press interview about his villainous past, everyone buys that he's totally a good guy now and gives him a round of applause.
He was the best guy around.
What about the people he murdered?
What murder?
Unsurprisingly, Osborn is still a piece of shit, and he immediately brought together some of the most prominent supervillains in the world to form their own evil version of the Illuminati called the Cabal. And with it in place, the Marvel Universe officially entered the era of Dark Reign. Secret Invasion oftentimes gets a lot of flack from the Marvel fandom because some of the most interesting and frankly some of the most important story threads were relegated to tie-ins and not the core book. And because of that, a lot of people never got the whole experience, including myself until I set out to make this video. Also, Tony Stark suffered severe character assassination during Civil War, with him becoming a straight-up fascist. For a large part of the fandom, he was one of the most hated characters in all of comics, so many were hoping that this could be redeemed by it being revealed that Tony was a Skrull sowing chaos this whole time, and that's why he was acting out of character during Civil War. And although that didn't happen, there was still a sense of schadenfreude that with Stark failing over and over and over again during Secret Invasion, then he was finally getting some of his much-deserved karma. But that's another issue that a lot of people had with the book. There weren't all that many interesting Skrull reveals. The Elektra plot twist leading up to the event was a genuine shock to people, but outside of her, the most prominent folks were Spider-Woman, Sue Storm, Hank Pym, Black Bolt, and Mockingbird, and the majority of them were body swapped right before the event, and none of that is really that interesting. But for as much as folks like to hate on it, I overall think that Secret Invasion is an enjoyable story, with all the big action fights that'll make your inner child go, "Ah, sick! That's so cool." This video is a part of my ongoing project to take deep dives into all of the big Marvel events, so be sure to check out the playlist for more. Thank you guys so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.